Anglers of the internet, welcome back to another Advanced Kayak Angler podcast brought to you by Fishing Online, fastest shipping on the internet. I'm your host, Kurt Smits. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Now let's get into it. Everybody on the internet, all the anglers out there, how are you guys all doing? Missed you last week. I was super sick with the flu that's been going around. I apologize. We're back on schedule now. I'm like 90% over it, so we will be on back to a weekly podcast again. Thank you for joining us. Forward-facing sonar is like such a huge topic right now. It is like it's very polarizing in our sport. There's a lot of drama around it. There's some anglers, very popular anglers out there putting out whole YouTube channels opposing it. And I use it myself. A lot of people use it. I'm not against it. I'm not necessarily like a proponent for it, but I'm not against it. But I wanted to highlight some stuff that you don't have to have it to do well. And we got a killer guest tonight, Jordan Marshall, and hopefully Matt Scotch if he makes it. Jordan, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing, Kurt?
Man, I'm doing good. Got just a little bit of crud left in me, and then once that leaves my body, I'll be good to go.
It is certainly going around. When you texted me last week and said you couldn't do it, I was like, well, I said I totally understand because I was getting over some funkiness myself. So it probably worked out a lot better for both of us to do it this week. Yeah. It sounds like.
Yeah, man. I had my head down in the toilet that day. I
wasn't that bad off. I was just hacking and coughing.
And so you know why you're here, and we're going to talk about some of the successes that you've had without forward-facing sonar. And do you have it now? Have you played around with it?
I bought it. It's actually sold and going to a guy local. But I literally just moved it off my table here so I could do the podcast because it's just been setting aside. I think the last time I actually had it, I used it and tried to learn it for 6 months or so, and kind of the winter of 2023 into the spring of 2024. When I got my new boat last year, I had some wiring issues. The people I had rig it up did not a great job, so I kind of took it off and was planning on re-putting it back on in the fall or summer because I didn't really need it in the spring, and just kind of never put it on there and did kind of fine and normal without it. And I realized I enjoy fishing a lot more without it, regardless. It was one of those things where I might have just tripped the breaker on the house here. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah. Jordan's experienced a slight technical difficulty here.
I got two heaters going, and a lot was happening there, but I think I'm square if I can just get everything squared away. I'm afraid my computer's gonna die. If it doesn't die, we'll be all right. Long story short, I'm no live scope right now, but I used it for 6 months or so, and just kind of I could go out and I had some upper 90-inch days on some kind of live scope fisheries.
Hey Jordan.
Yeah.
Jordan, you're breaking up. Can you back out and come back in real quick?
Yeah. Give me 2 seconds.
So Jordan Marshall's had a ton of success in kayak fishing. I mean, if you don't know his name, you haven't been following the competitive side of the sport for very long. He has dominated kind of the Tennessee Valley a lot, the national scene. He's an AOI guy for Hobie. He's done extremely well, and he's got a lot of success without it. And quite frankly, my best success has been without it as well. And I honestly was able to afford to buy it from winning tournaments. like such as Norman behind me. I mean, I was actually, that money there went towards buying my first Panoptic setup. So you definitely don't have to have forward facing sonar to do well. And as a matter of fact, I think in some ways it can be a distraction. You can get so fixated because you see the fish, whether they're biting or not. You see the fish, and a lot of times fish will react to a lure but not commit to it. So you'll see them, you'll move the fish, you'll run a swim bait over them and they'll come up and look at it and maybe follow it for a second, or you'll see them come up to a jig or whatever you're fishing, and you'll see it over and over. And sometimes that will trick you into spending too much time on that fish. I think we got Jordan back.
Sorry about that. I think I tripped a breaker on the road dog cabin here. I had two heaters plugged in, trying not to freeze. So we should be good. On my electronics turned off, except my computer, and it started changing where the sound was coming and mic was hooking up. But we're rocking and rolling now. Crisis averted. My apologies. It's been
No
a while
worries.
since I've done this podcastery thing.
Well, I'm glad you decided to come back on my show, man. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Oh yeah, it's I enjoy talking. I enjoy talking fishing. Um, need to get back with my own show, but to be honest, there's part of me that just is kind of not have the desire to wrap my entire life around fishing as much as it used to. But that's a whole nother story for another day. As far as the live scope thing goes, I'm not sure what you caught and what you didn't, but I had live scope, and used it for probably 6 months and was going around to these places. If I hear fishing was good, scoping on, kind of live scope fisheries, areas that were not, your Cherokee lakes, um your Rocky Mountain, North Georgia lakes that there's a bunch of YouTube videos on. I mean, I could go out and kind of go and catch fish, if I knew, like, somebody said, hey, there's some fish, on Rocky or on Cherokee in this creek, you can go over there, and I'd go over there and catch, 90 inches. To me, I don't like it. It takes a lot of the fun. It takes the figuring things out of fishing. Um, I'm not an advocate saying it should go away. It should disappear. Technology's, a fantastic thing. I'm not going to shy away from fishing trails that promote it. That's not anything that I'm against by any means. To me, it's a personal preference and a fun thing. I don't. If you give me an opportunity to flip a 20-incher out of some reeds or flip a 20-incher on a frog or a buzz bait, I would much rather do that than probably catch a 22 on a minnow on live scope. It's not nearly as fun for me, and I'm not sure why that is. I'm kind of just old school, I guess. I've always been the guy that kind of rolls up wearing flannel shirts and boots and just kind of goes fishing. And that to me is personal preference, but I don't hate the live scope. It's just not something I enjoy. Um, it
Let me ask you a quick question here. Since you did use it you're pretty familiar with how to use it, were you able to get to the point where you saw like one big fish and target that fish off the kayak?
I could not chase fish the way they do on Bass Live. The only
Okay.
person I've ever seen do that in a kayak is Ewing Miner. And even talking to other live scope guys, I'm sure there is. I'm not saying he's the only one. He's the only person that I know that can do that in a kayak, and even then he'll say it's extremely difficult because you just can't move fast enough to do that. Now, I have chased and targeted an individual fish in a bass boat when I first got live scope and was kind of getting into it. There's a local guy, and everybody knows that I'm more of a power fisherman anyway, so even when I was, experimenting with live scope, my favorite thing to do with live scope was going and throwing glides on real clear water lakes for bass that way. And I went with a guy on, we'll just say it's in a clear, deep East Tennessee lake, and we went gliding, and we were targeting individual fish. There was sometimes we would pull up and target individual fish. There was sometimes we'd pull up on a point where, it's kind of a community spot and you couldn't see fish, and you're basically working a glide, you know, a handful of feet deep. It didn't, all that stuff kind of just depending on the day kind of thing, obviously, like anything else. But you could see individual fish come up, and you're trying to get it away from some smaller fish and try to work it for bigger fish and things like that. So even though I've only had it for 6 months, I feel like I put a ridiculous amount of time in that 6 months trying to play with what I like doing, what I don't like doing. I really like throwing a glide. I caught some fish in tournaments on a glide with live scope, and did that to the point where I would go into tournaments going, if they're where I think they are or where they were in practice, I'm going to go wreck them on live scope. And even then, even though I was kind of making it my plan A for the day, and you get out there and catch a big fish, it's like, okay, that was cool and all, but I just to me, it's not as fun as just going and working a glide over a flat and being like, I know there should be fish here. To me, when it gets down to where you're so dialed in, like the guys on TV with Bassmaster, where they're chasing individual fish to throw a minnow at them, is so far away from fun fishing and what is interesting to me, where I've basically grown up learning patterns. I'm a straight up pattern angler, and I'll tell you that over and over and over again. Watts Bar this past weekend, it was one on live scope. Kudos to Luke. Luke's a hammer with live scope. I wish he would fish more national events, or actually maybe not. He beats me too much locally. I'm not necessarily sure I want him showing up to more national stuff, but Luke Graham's a hammer. That fishes our Tennessee State Series. A dude won with like 97 inches of smallmouth. But um, what I went into that tournament, I didn't have any practice. I called a buddy of mine that was practicing and said, "Hey, what's your water temp and what third of the lake you're on?" And that's basically all I asked him. That's all I knew. I knew the water temp was in the low 50s. I knew we had some warm days, so I went on a Friday afternoon after I got off work right before dark and made kind of a loop on Watts Bar. And anybody that's familiar with Watts Bar, we had the Hobie there. There's three major inflows for Watts Bar. You've got the Tennessee River system, the Clinch River system, and the Emory River system. And when I kind of made my loop around where those three rivers come into Watts Bar, the Emory was blown out muddy, so I pretty well eliminated it ahead of time because I don't like fishing chocolate milk, your cold, muddy water. The Clinch had good color in it, and the Tennessee River had good color in it. And I know this time of year when I'm looking for specific patterns, the shallower those fish are, the better off I am. Just my preference. I've made the joke 100 times. If I've made it once, if I can't stick my rod and touch the bottom underneath my kayak, I'm not in my comfort zone. And to that, live scope was the complete opposite, where I felt like if I was shallower than 15 feet, I was not utilizing live scope properly. Now, as a side note, I think there's a lot of guys that think, once you get so shallow, live scope isn't helpful. And there's a lot of guys like me that like to fish in, 6, 7 foot of water or less. I think there's a point in time where that, I read it in an article years ago when the big deep crankbaits were a thing, where there was the forgotten depth of fish that were not being targeted from your 8 to 15, 8 to 12 feet, and there were people catching fish like that like crazy in all the tournaments. And I think we're kind of getting back to that area, maybe next year, this year or next year or something, where we're going to see a resurgence of fish caught in that kind of forgotten depth area. And I wouldn't doubt it if there's some articles about that at some point. But me going into Watts Bar, I looked and found, some areas of the river I wanted to target. I knew there was current on the upper end, so I kind of eliminated the lower third of the lake, where I knew a bunch of guys would be scoping. Those fish would be offshore, in the clear water, out in the open. It's not my thing. And I knew we had some warm days. The rain from the last few days from that warm front would be having muddier water in the backs of the creeks. Not necessarily muddy, but stained. Everybody knows stained water gets warmer, And during the tournament, I caught a small limit, on a jig, kind of shallow fishing, main channel points or whatever else, because, it was early in the morning. And as the day went on, I realized the way the wind was blowing, I looked on Google Maps. I found a pocket that I knew would have some water coming into it from the last few days. It would, in theory, be warmer. And what made that particular pocket special was the wind was blowing directly from the mouth into the back of the pocket, keeping the hot water in the back. So I have no graph, no electronics. I knew going into it that water would probably be warmer. I've got this weird knack from some of my local guys give me a hard time where I kind of feel the water, put the Marshall Magic in it, and kind of can get a general gist of what the water temperature is, within a few degrees. And I knew when I got to that second boat ramp, loaded up, made a Marshall midday move, put it in the next boat ramp, and was like, put my hand in the water once I kind of got away from the bank a little bit, and was like, okay, this water's got to be 5 degrees warmer. I mean, it was a noticeable difference. And especially this time of year, a few degrees can make a big difference. And I probably caught 20 fish in the back of this creek in water shallow enough that was tough to run my motor and turn around. And to me, that is like the ultimate, like, oh, I figured it out. I didn't need to go look for fish. I kind of used my prior knowledge of what I like to do, took patterns and what I like to do and combined it into a successful tournament day. I won some money, finished fifth out of 70 people or something like that. And it's, obviously, everybody hears about the live scope. The guy with the live scope won. I'm not saying I killed him by any means that day, but you can be competitive in a series over the course of a year by being consistent, knowing patterns, and going off of things you learn, without having to go out there and spend $4,000 on live scope and fish 5 days a week practicing for the event.
And what you just said is like, these are things that you're not going to learn if you're just staring at your live scope screen. You have to, our fish finders are incredibly powerful. Like, they have temperature on them, right? That,
Yeah.
what you mentioned, you didn't need a fish finder. You knew it was going to be warmer back there. But someone who doesn't have that knowledge, using your fish finder, and you come across a warm spot and it's just, it's February.
Yeah.
May not be a bad idea to just chuck a bait around a little bit.
Yeah, wind is not always a bad thing. I like wind in the summer. I like to compare, current and wind are very, very similar to me. I compare current more as wind to a person, where when it's cold outside, current can make fish lethargic. If it's cold outside, I don't want to be out in the open getting blown around by the wind. So, a place in the back of a creek pocket where there's been some recent flow in and the water is warmer back there because the sun's heating that dirtier water up quicker than the main channel that's clear. That to me is a golden ticket to catching some fish almost always. There's numerous articles about that. Cherokee Lake, that's a big thing for me over the years, is finding creeks that are coming in the spring, because that dirtier water is a lot warmer. I the wind can be your friend, especially in the summertime. It can keep cooler water in places, and then this time of year where warmer water is kind of keeping, or wind is kind of keeping that shallow water warm in the back. It's not having anywhere to go. It's not getting sucked out by the main channel current and pulling everything out to the main channel. Yeah, it's the wind is kind of keeping that surface temp water back there. It's not really knocking the surface temp down. It's just kind of keeping everything balled up in an area. And those fish are in one little deep hole, just plastered up against the rocks. I mean, right in dirt shallow water, because that sun was still beating on that dirty water.
Man, here's a good Matt Scotch has joined us, so he made it. Let me bring him on.
Hey guys.
Matt, welcome on, man.
What's happening? Sorry about being late. I'm on Central Time. That I just
it's all right, man.
Not the first time this has happened.
Yeah. No problem. Jordan was just telling us, like, he just had some luck this past weekend on Watts Bar, fishing without forward-facing sonar. And we've already talked a little bit about the episode, that this whole episode's about, you don't have to have forward-facing sonar. to do well in tournaments. There's a lot more to fishing than just staring at a screen or just using one piece of equipment to leverage your whole tournament on. I use it, and I always use it. Sometimes I actually just I put them up, I put the transducers up, and I won't use it at all, especially if I'm fishing shallow, like Jordan was just talking about. Man, why don't you tell us about one of the times that you had really good success without using forward-facing sonar? And one of the things that Jordan had mentioned was he's been using it's patterns for him. He's into patterns.
Yeah, absolutely. Fishing patterns, fishing my strengths I'm kind of a power fisherman. I feel like I can do anything versatility wise, but when I'm really enjoying fishing, what I love doing is I love casting. I love casting targets, just like Jordan. I love to fish spinner bait. And anytime I can make that work, I'm looking to make that work. And so many times, God, I go into a tournament and, the only thing I really want to do is throw that damn spinner bait. It's not always the same color or the same blade configuration, anything like that. It's just like something I have a lot of confidence in because my ability to make casts to likely areas where I think the fish are going to be hiding at. I've never fished a tournament with forward-facing sonar, but I will say I will be coming to the dark side eventually. I've just been a little hesitant. I was fishing with Christine and Jordan yesterday, and I was watching them scope 8-pounders, and Christine potentially lost a double digit. And I caught a lot of fish all around them, but I'm catching 5-pounders, kind of blind casting the stuff I'm seeing on side imaging, and they're actually lining these fish up and plucking them off. And it's quite impressive what you can do with the technology once you're good at it. Anybody that says it's just a tool isn't good with it. When you're good with it, it's like being on steroids in baseball, and just saying that's just an energy drink.
Yeah, I use it, and I've got a pretty complicated setup with it where I got 2 transducers, one in down and one in perspective mode. Man, but I've just never had that confidence, or I'm just not good enough with it to pick out one big fish and feel like I have a lot of confidence I'm going to catch that one big fish. I end up using it more so just to line up my perfect cast, get that perfect angle on some structure that I can't see. I spend more time using it for that than I do chasing individual fish. And I always thought it was I guess my personal excuse was always, I'm on a kayak. You can't do it as easy on a kayak. But you're sitting here telling me Christine and Guillermo are out there.
And Jordan with Western.
Or Jordan, sorry, Jordan.
Jordan. G was there too, but we're traditionally fishing, just how we like to fish. And they're out there scoping right next to us. And the results, they don't lie, man. They speak for themselves. And a lot of people, the past few years have been really excelling with live scopes. So it is an extremely useful tool once you understand what you're doing with it. I feel like boat positioning is huge, knowing how you're moving and being able to keep the transducer on the fish and being able to make that cast to the fish. But and you won't catch them all. But the thing is, you're for a fact you're putting it on a fish's nose.
Yeah. And in a tournament situation, you only have to catch 5. You don't have to catch all the fish. We're only trying to catch the 5 biggest fish.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found useful for it, for myself was a jerkbait fishing. I could really see when I had to change up to get the fish to commit to the jerk to bite the jerkbait. I would see them follow it and then them stop. And if I waited too long, they would start peeling. It just told you the cadence you had to do. And you would never even know that fish was there if you didn't have forward-facing sonar, right? Because you would never see that fish. You would just be, no, I'm not.
The amount of information you get in real time with forward-facing sonar is unreal. It's just a matter of figuring out how to control all the variables so that you can present your bait to the fish.
One of the coolest things. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm good. Yeah, go for it.
One of the coolest things I did with LiveScope when I had it was me and Ewing went out and got on a big school of crappie that probably had 100 crappie in it. And we were in probably 40 foot of water. And, we're throwing little Bobby Garland jig heads and little 1.5 inch, 1.75 inch little minnow, crappie minnow things. I'm throwing it 40 foot out there and watching it fall 40 feet to a school of crappie, and seeing that little tiny jig head and minnow, little crappie minnow on there, 40 foot away and 40 foot down was crazy to me once that's dialed in. And switch a color, drag it over the school, and you could see them come up and react to it. And you throw a new color down there, and they'd go nuts immediately. And then after you throw it a few more times in there and catch a couple, and they start getting weary to that color, you switch colors and you throw back down there. And then sometimes you may not have ever known that it was like, oh, there was just 3 or 4 crappie down there. No, there was 100. You just had to keep changing colors, and you don't see things like that, and unless you were on live scope. It is, I mean, Scotch is not lying, it is a useful tool. It is one of those things that really changes a different perspective in fishing. It's not my favorite thing in the world to do.
Yeah, it's not what we like. I've been fishing for so long. Like there's something I love about fishing. I love feeling the bite. To me, the feeling that bite is electric. And
Yeah.
when you're looking at live scope, you're anticipating it to a lot of degree, and it kind of takes away that like that instinctfulness and just that like that unknown. And like when that stump comes, and man, I just look for it, man. I really do. I look for that bite. But to be competitive in these tournaments, the way technology is going, the skill set of the anglers that are using it, you almost are being forced to utilize it going forward.
Well,
Go ahead.
do you think you absolutely have to have it? I feel like we're definitely seeing more anglers use it and have success, but I also feel like I'm still seeing tournaments won shallow or won by guys who don't use it.
It can be won without, absolutely. But that there's going to be tournaments where, let's just say, the fish have spawned, they've moved offshore, and the guy with the live scope's the one that can see the school out there versus the guy that's fishing traditionally. What if those fish aren't locked on the bottom? You don't know how to present that bait the same way someone with forward-facing sonar can. And so there's going to be times of the year, the spring and the fall, where the guy who's a good power fisherman can lock and load and give it to them. But you get into those post spawn summer tournaments, and I feel like those are definitely in the scoper's hand. And even in pre spawn, when the fish haven't come in and they're staged offshore, or maybe creek channels or timber or something like that, you can selectively target them with the forward facing sonar. Um, so many of the guys at Rayburn this past weekend at the Open, that's what they were doing. They caught them with forward facing sonar, and that's just the deal, man. I mean, it's the way competitive fishing is going. But I do feel like there are periods that you can still whack 100+ inches just power fishing, and those are the days I look for.
I mean, especially like lakes, I feel like I'm a little bit, obviously I don't have as much time in Texas as you do, but like Lake St. Clair, I feel like live scope excels on those super clear lakes, smallmouth oriented lakes, where if you hit a smallmouth with a jig, 9 chances out of 10, it's going to eat. I mean, if you actually physically hit them, which you can do with live scope, I feel like you have a better chance at getting them to eat.
I mean, I see it in Texas on like the muddiest lake you've ever seen in your life. A guy named Brandon Burks is out here scoping, and I mean, every single day he's catching a 10 pounder. Every single day, a 10 pounder has become like the new 8. It's almost not even impressive when they catch them, and the water is yoo-hoo. And not you wouldn't even know the bass live in there if you didn't have forward facing sonar. But yeah, it's just an incredibly powerful tool.
Wow. Say that again. Say that one more time. Say that again. Say what you just said again.
Oh, you wouldn't know the bass live in there if you didn't have forward facing sonar?
Man, that's a powerful statement that you're saying. I was not expecting to hear this tonight, to be honest with you. That's a powerful statement that you just said right there. You wouldn't know the bass lived there unless you had forward-facing sonar.
Yeah, nobody went to this lake prior to about 3 years ago when it kind of got, become public knowledge and the guides started going down there. I mean, if you see pictures in Texas, I mean, Brandon Burke pictures and some of Josh Jones's uh and I mean it's not it's like dirty. Like I said, you would think it's just got catfish in it.
Wow. Wow. Well, Jordan, what do you think about that statement he just made? Because honestly, that surprised me. I thought I was going to have you two guys on here tonight. This is how I thought it was going to go. And we were going to like kind of poo-poo on forward-facing sonar saying you don't need it. But what Scotch is saying is like to be competitive, and we're speaking in a competitive realm, right? You know, doing tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about that statement, man? You wouldn't even know that they were there without the forward-facing sonar.
It's I don't know. I've never been to that particular lake, so I don't like fishing in Texas at all, let alone some random lake. But I don't know, when I think muddy water, I the first thing I think of is fishing shallow. I just I don't know. It's that's a strong statement to say the least. But numbers don't lie when you look at some of those guys that are making a full-time living guiding and doing YouTube stuff and social media. I mean, they're if I was to say, hey, I'm going to go fish the Tennessee River chain, I'm going to catch 100 inches over the next 5 days fishing 5 Tennessee River lakes. That would be my goal, right? And I understand Texas is a different place, but Josh Jones, the live scope pro, is posted on social media saying, I'm going to catch a 60-pound bag in the next 5 days from 5 random lakes in Texas or wherever he's at. So it's certainly a powerful tool. But I feel like it's one of those things you can definitely do it. I mean, when live scope kind of started, kind of being a big thing in the kayak thing, the first thing we were all hearing about was that Watts Bar event in 2021. That was the first event where I was like, man, I wish I had live scope. There was some guys that were, and Kurt, you might have been one of them, saying they could see fish swim around the bridge pylons. You'd see them pop up and then disappear. And I grew up kind of fishing Watts Bar in this area, and my bank fish were just not hanging around that day when it was 8 degrees or 4 degrees or whatever that Watts Bar event started out at. And that was kind of the first time I was like, man, I probably need to look into this live scope thing and putting it on a kayak. And the week before, or the tournament before that, was Seminole, when Ewing kind of came onto the scene. It was his first Hobie event, and he had borrowed somebody's kayak that had live scope on it. And he was one or two spots ahead of me at Seminole. And I'm like, who in the world in their right mind is using live scope on a freaking kayak at Seminole? Like, that seems to be the most non live scope place ever. And as time goes on, we see bigger events there. There's guys, catching them on the Elite Series on live scope around all that timber, and you kind of realize what a valuable tool that is. But you know, the moral of the story was 2021. After thinking I needed live scope that spring, I won the BOS Angler of the Year with still no graph on the kayak, and had events in my AOY top 3 or whatever from Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. So it can be done. It's getting harder, honestly, because it's not just people are learning how to use live scope more, or better, more better. Is that I'll use more better. And people are getting better with live scope, and not only that, there's more people going out and using it. So um, it's not a guarantee. Those guys are still having to spend a lot of time on the water, and use it and learn it. And I think it's one of those things. If you can put your time in with live scope, and it's something that you can enjoy and do, then more power to you. It's a great tool. I mean, it helps take out a lot of the learning curve for fishing and having to go through patterns and all that. I mean, you can basically lock a Sakamata shad in your hand and fish 12 months out of the year with the same bait. It kind of takes a little bit of the guesswork out of, where you're going. Do I need to throw a crankbait? Can I throw is the water temp warm enough to throw a spinnerbait this week? Is it, if cold front, am I going to have to drag a jig or whatever? You can just go out there and look at kind of more, not really community spots, but kind of more obvious places. Cause I feel like, you can kind of go to any main channel point on any of these lakes and kind of just be like, all right, here's my starting spot. I'm going to start at the dam and start working my way up through these main channel points until you find some fish. You already know they're going to eat, the swim bait on a jig head. I mean, it's just, do I change colors a little bit? I mean, that's really about all you're really having to change. You're not having to change an entire profile. You can fish for 12 months out of the year with live scope with one rod, one reel, and jig heads and minnows, and you can actually kind of see that in kind of reflected in tackle shops of hey, we're not selling as much stuff, we're not selling crankbaits nearly as much and things like that, because you're A, not losing as many baits, and B, you're kind of throwing a lot of the same baits. You kind of get these hot baits and hot jig heads where everybody's kind of wanting those, but to me, it's just not as fun. It takes some of the guesswork out. No hatred to the live scope community, but it makes it a little easier if you can say, hey, I'm just going to throw this one or two baits all year, and all I need to do is kind of go to a lake and start running main channel stuff the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, God, I'm just like, I'm shocked what this conversation's going. For me, the first time I really I had heard about Panoptics, but when I got really interested in it was at Seminole. When Jake Harshman got first, I got third, and I had missed a couple big fish, so me and Jake were talking, and I was crying to him how I missed a couple fish, and he got first, and so he starts talking about how he was using live scope, and I don't know if you guys know Jake. He's a passionate guy, man. So when he was talking about it, it was getting me fired up. I was like, what? Really? And you guys know that I fished the Ohio River and I fished for white bass and hybrids. Well, at one time, it had side imaging on there, right, which is very useful for fishing schooling fish. I put it on a pole so I could sweep it in front of me. It wasn't live scope. It would show you a big blob if there was a school in front of you, right? And that was about all you could make out was blobs. But it was like a super rudimentary way to see what was ahead of me before I blew it up, because I'd go back in these little tiny tributaries. So when Jake said that to me, man, I was like, and then I had another good tournament. So I'm like, well, now I'm a little flush with some money, and I got it. And I tell you what, once I got it, it's not that I haven't done well, but man, I felt like I did a lot better when I wasn't staring at that screen.
It's easy to really get caught up in, especially here locally. When I was trying to learn how to use it, I live close to Fort Loudon and Tellico, and we don't have 10-pounders lurking around here. It was really hard for me to tell the difference in, a 12-inch fish and an 18-inch fish, because, you catch a limit of 16s here and you're probably going to win a kayak tournament. You catch a limit of 18s and you're the talk of the local kayak scene, because there's just not a bunch of 18-inch fish on Loudon. And, what I was, trying to go out and do is, I couldn't tell the difference in the size of fish, but I could catch a bunch. And sometimes I would just kind of be like, all right, I'm going to sit here and figure out what this school wants. And you'd finally figure out what they want to eat. And they'd be a bunch of 12 and 14-inch fish. And then I'd spend a bunch of time catching those fish to see if they were bigger ones, instead of going around and looking. I felt like I just wasted a bunch of time. And unless I kind of was like, go somewhere like we talked about, like Rocky or Cherokee or something. And, I kind of got a bug in my ear of, hey, this is where some generally bigger fish are. I felt like I could go catch them without issue. The problem for me, that frustrated me with it, was I couldn't tell the size of the fish. I would be chasing down stripers at Cherokee sometimes, and Norris. I'd be chasing stripers. That was the thing that gave me a hard time, was trying to see the size of the fish. If you get somewhere where, if you're in Florida or Texas and you kind of know the main thing is bass, I guess, it kind of helps a little bit. But, on the Tennessee River, I chased around everything but largemouth, it seemed like, for 6 months.
Yeah, I feel like there is a downside, like because you'll see fish react to your baits and they won't always commit, and they may be big fish. There might be three or four. So there are some negative aspects. It all depends on how disciplined you are as an angler, whether you can break yourself away from fish to go find other fish that are willing to bite. I personally still believe, even though Matt's got me questioning this, I think that the better anglers will always rise to the top. I feel like if you're a really good angler, whether you fish with it or without it, you're gonna work the craft of fishing and however you personally like to fish to such a degree that you'll be able to be successful with it. Now,
If that was
obviously,
the case, KVD wouldn't have quit.
you really think that's why he quit? Was forward-facing sonar?
100%.
Wow.
100%.
Wow.
He doesn't want to fish that way, and he knows he sees
Yeah.
trends. He's smart, and that's he's a power fisherman. He's an instinctive fisherman, and he doesn't want to be staring at that fish finder like that. I mean, to look at it, yes, but it changes how you fish. And if
I
you're
feel
somebody
like
that
you're partially true, yes, but I feel like if KVD really wanted to keep fishing and keep getting after it, I feel like if live scope was the sole reason he did not want to professionally fish anymore, then you would see him come back and have fished the NPFL one of these last or this year or maybe even next year.
that's
With
a step below for KVD. He doesn't
it,
have to come back to fish the
I
NPFL.
know he doesn't have to, but I feel like if you compare some of the guys that are getting into the NPFL from the Elite Series or Major League Fishing, a lot of the guys that have gravitated towards that are non live scope anglers. Um, I feel like if KVD comes back for that, then I feel like you're 100% correct. But I think at some point he just kind of is like, all right, I've made my money, I'm good, I'm done. You know what I mean?
I think as a competitor, once you feel like you're no longer the dominant, like eventually, like you're no longer the king. Somebody new talent's coming up and new technologies coming up, and that live scope came on the scene so fast. And the kids that have come up with it through high school fishing and college fishing, they've completely trended to it, accepted it, and they're freaking good with it. Look
Yeah.
at any tournament that's going on, the Bass Pro Tour, the Bassmaster Opens. They're being won. Every single person in the top 10 is live scoping. You're not getting guys going out there throwing chatterbaits in the grass that are dominating tournaments. It's just not happening anymore. You can catch a good bag that way, but tournaments just are not being won the way they historically were. And it's fact.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that, I mean, is it come down to the point where it's either like you are full-time live scoping or you're not? There's no in between for a lot
I
of these
think there's
competitors?
there's time in between, but once you're good with the scope, you don't want to do anything but that. I mean, look at these guys. I mean, look at the Millikins of the world. I mean, the guy, people just thought he was a YouTube fisherman. He got good with live scope. He's on the leads, not just on the leads. He's winning. You know, dude. I mean, that right there should tell you a lot. If you watch that guy's YouTube, it's quite impressive.
Yeah.
He'd go out and catch a 40-pound sack and on 4 fish. You know, like nothing on a crappie jig and on a blade bait. I was watching it last night. It's quite impressive. And a
I
lot of
mean,
the young kids that are coming up, they can all do the same thing.
God, I just haven't had that type of success with it for largemouth bass. Now, I can't lie that I've seemed to have dialed it in for schooling fish like white bass and hybrids. It's a ton of fun because just for a lot of reasons that other people won't see schools, I can see them when they're not like in obvious places, right? And then it's just those fish. It's just a matter of getting a lure in front of them, the right one, and
I mean, even locally in our local kind of wildcat events, like in a bass boat, I mean, it seems like every older guy that's just retired or something, that's his purchase is live scope, and he's going out there and catching fish like crazy. Even guys that have been against it for the last 3 or 4 years, they kind of make the commitment to buy it, and then they're catching a bunch of fish, and they'll tell you it's not as much fun as dragging a jig, old school with a pork chunk on it, but they retire and they buy live scope, and they're just catching fish, and I mean it is what it is. It's changed fishing a lot. Like I said, I don't particularly like it. I'm not gonna shy away from tournament trails that allow it or anything like that. I went and bought one myself. I just to me it takes every little bit of fun that is left in fishing out of it to go and stare at a screen. I feel like I can if I've got a free day and it's cold outside, I feel like, it's just the same as sitting at the house and playing a video game and watching a fish come up and eating a bait. The only difference is if I sit at home and do it, I don't have to get cold. You know, that's my personal opinion on it, but I'm out here fishing tournament against people without it and being consistent. I mean, another top 5 in Hobie AOY for the last, however many years that it's been going, and none of it with live scope. I don't think I've live scoped in a Hobie event at all, but RIP Hobie BOS, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully there'll be a return. But those are some impressive results without it, and those would be some of the results that I would use to say, hey, you don't have to have it, because there's so many people, and you hear them talking, and I talk to a lot of people who are, let's say, newer to the sport, maybe even newer to fishing. And a lot of them are like, that's like one of the first things that they say they need to get. It's not, I want to get it, I need to get live scope.
Mm-hmm.
And quite honestly, that like hurts me a little bit, because I'm like, God, you don't have to get it. I was like, it's a powerful tool. There's no doubt, especially or anything else that's schooling fish. And Matt says, obviously all these guys are now on kayaks are starting to dial it in that they're fishing for one fish with them. Super powerful.
If I had a kid, hypothetically, if I had a son, daughter, whatever, and they told me, hey, I want to be a professional fisherwoman when I grow up, the first thing I would go do is buy them the coolest live scope setup I could afford and let them learn how to use it. That is, I mean,
that's where it's at.
as much as I hate it, that is, if somebody told me, hey, I want to be a professional fisherman, if you're a 16-year-old kid, like if my buddy Brody that we've been taking fishing for the last 2 years, he's 16, he just got on a local fishing team that I've happened to go speak at and talk to kayak fishing about. If he tells me, hey, I want to be a professional fisherman, I like fishing this much, I'd be like, if I were you, I would spend every last waking minute of every available time you have to go and be the best live scoper on the planet. As much as that pains me to say, if somebody asks me that's in high school, hey, I want to be a professional fisherman, it's you could actually go be a better live scoper than everyone else. You still have to have some sort of personality to communicate with people and get sponsorship money, but I feel like if you were starting out right now, you're never going to make it to the Elite Series or MLF with without live scope fluency.
Yep. I mean, working at Dobbins Rods and living 10 minutes from Lake Fork, I'm pretty connected with people in the fishing industry here in Texas. And I mean, it's eye opening. I mean, all of these kids have it, and the kids that have it and are using it, they're the ones winning. The kids that are out there power fishing, they're not really getting them. It's just the honest truth. I mean, it's the way that the sport is trending. Not saying it's completely dominating kayak fishing, but I will tell you, from the national events I've traveled to and fished recently, I would tell you 75% of people have a forward-facing sonar on their kayak, and that's telling right there. The 3 out of 4 do have it.
Yeah, because when I first got it, it seemed like there was like literally like 2 other kayakers with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then
you can go compete without it, but if you specifically wanted to go and this is what I want to do, I mean, to be a professional fisherman now, you either have to be really good at the right live scope, or you have to be a very good YouTube personality,
Yep.
or have really good friends that will pay your way until you have some sort of one of the other. That's your only options. You cannot go and just fish tournaments power fishing and be a fantastic angler that is known for catching fish.
Those guys are falling by the wayside. Look at the AOI and Bassmaster. You'll see a lot of famous names: Gerald Swindle, Iconelli. I mean, God, the list goes on and on. It's eye opening.
Ott Defoe, even if before live scope, if you'd asked me who's the best fisherman in the world, I'd have told you Ott Defoe. And since live scope has become extremely prevalent in this whole professional fishing scene, I love Ott to death. He's an East Tennessee guy, but he's
Hmm.
I wouldn't tell you Ott Defoe's probably in the top 5, probably top 10 at this point. He's still an unbelievable angler, but
Yeah.
it's not the same.
Yep. You got your Wheelers and your Cannells now, and those guys can catch them without scope, but with scope, they're so deadly.
Yeah.
Wow, man, this is really changing my perspective on a lot of things, man. I was kind of,
How many first place trophies does Ewing Minor have from the Hobie?
More than I do.
geez, I don't know, man. A few.
I think it's around 8. I mean,
Yeah.
I hope I'm not shorting him, but it's a lot of first place trophies.
He does. He does. He pretty much dominated it with them. He's
Not everyone. He won Susky twice, I think. You don't use sport baits in there, but I'm just saying it is a powerful tool for the people that embrace it and that learn it. And a lot of times, what I'm saying, it's the younger generation. I mean, you don't have to. If you just get good with that, you don't have to go out and buy an arsenal of crankbaits, chatterbaits, tungsten. You just need some minnows and your jig heads and some
Yeah.
jerk baits, and you can go snapping on them. And they're really, really good. Like I said, look at the results from any open. Clarksville dominated by live scope. The one on Rayburn last weekend dominated by live scope. You know, it's the way it's going. Bassmaster on Lake Fork last year dominated by live scope. It's the way it is. I mean, just watching Christine and Jordan. I mean, she had a double digit on yesterday. I mean, it's insane.
so. I mean, basically, what you get. Yeah, I mean, you guys have like basically just said, if you want to be competitive at competitive fishing, it's probably the best idea to learn forward facing sonar. If that's your main goal, is just to do well,
Hmm.
not necessarily have fun, because I mean, even
I
though I
don't know.
use
It
it,
looks like Christine's having fun. Like it really did look like she was squealing and yelling and doing her freaking routine. So I don't know. It does still look like fun. I'm not gonna lie.
yeah. Wow, man, this is like changing my perspective big time. So, I mean, let's say someone doesn't have the money for it, right? What would you guys recommend to do to combat, like, what would you guys do actually to combat someone with live scope? Not that you're fishing, not that you're going to push them off their spot or anything like that, but what are you going
It's
to
more time on the
do?
water.
More time on the water.
Yeah,
Just
a really, really good game plan and a good strategy goes a long ways. Understanding fish patterns and movement can still really put you in the right place at the right time to bust a big bag. And that's what I did last year in Texas, and winning the AOI and the Texas Bass Nation. It's just knowing where those fish want to be at certain times of the year, having that time on the water and I mean, I caught them all power fishing for the most part, power and finesse fishing, and uh, obviously I don't have any scopes, so I mean that's what I did. I mean it to the tune of a little over 20 grand, just here in Texas. So
that's a good payday, man. 20 grand. I ain't gonna lie, man. 20 grand.
yeah, for a season of fishing in my cheap kayak, that's been paid for 3 years, like yeah, I had a lot of things to write off.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, it's between 2022 and 2023, it was the same, between, I won the same AOY that Scotch did, just in Tennessee version, not Texas, but no live scope, and it was our our state championship in 2022. I won on Chickamauga, and it was fishing sloughs with a frog, a buzzbait, and flipping and a Cinco. And the majority of the 2023 series for that was um, Pickwick, fishing on rivers here at the house where we had TOC that one year. It was probably Watts. I won an event on Watts Bar. I actually was paddling for that event. I didn't even have my Hobie for the Watts Bar event that I won in 2023. I was in a Jackson Coosa, and it's doable. I mean, they were guys that were live scoping that event as well. I mean, it's not like if you have live scope, someone's going to win a tournament in a kayak and live scope. I think that's the fortunate thing for us still, is we're not entirely plagued by, live scope only, but it is becoming more and more common. But I mean, you can still go out and even Drew Gregory's made an entire living off
Absolutely.
of fishing in a paddle kayak, and now that we've got motors, he can motor up the creeks and things, and it's very hard to be a Drew Gregory, but Drew is setting that example for
Drew is the
fishing
upper
without live scope.
echelon.
Yeah, Drew's on another planet. I'm not 100% he's human.
Yeah,
And
he's
he
an
was supposed to be
incredible
on this
fisherman.
with you guys. It just he couldn't reschedule. He's busy setting up down in Florida. Um, because again, he's one of those guys like who's had success like you guys have. And let's face it, your guys' success in both your states, you're probably, and I'll say it, two of them, the two most competitive kayak fishing states in the country is
Yeah.
Texas and Tennessee. I'm not bashing on anybody else, but when you look at the list of anglers, you guys go up against the stiffest competition for a local, or a state.
Texas is a huge state that has a lot of kayak anglers, and Tennessee, even though it's not gigantic, I mean, we had guys for our Watts Bar event. I mean, it was not much above freezing when we launched last Saturday or 2 Saturdays ago. Cold February event after we had. I mean, it rained while we were on the water, and it was 40 something degrees, I feel like, and we had like 78 people in 40-degree rain, and there were guys that drove from Missouri. The guy that won the Big Bass 250 came from Missouri, and we got guys that fished our entire series in 2023 and 2024 that drive down from Illinois and Indiana every single time we have a Tennessee Bass Nation event. And we've got like Papa Joe drives up here and fishes a majority of our Tennessee Bass Nation stuff from wherever Papa Joe comes from, because he drove straight from Florida for that Bass Nation and drove straight up there to Watts Bar, I'm pretty sure, and fished it. So I mean, we've got guys that come from everywhere to fish Tennessee Bass Nation, and Texas is the same way. Texas is a gigantic state full of absolute hammers that have won a lot of national events, and it's to do that is not an easy thing. Either one of the states.
So, I guess this is just really opening my eyes, and maybe some other people's too, to like just really truly how much this is changing the sport, right? Because for me, a lot of it was just like I said, for me, it was lining up the right angle on stuff and identifying when fish were suspended, so I could really dial in. Okay, so they're exactly at 40 feet out, 25 feet down, 14 feet from the bottom. But it's more than that, man. It's not just that everybody has it, and it's one of those things too that I think people underestimate how much work you have to put into actually learning how to use it, way more so than side imaging, because I think it's more powerful. So there's a lot more to know about it.
It's dialing it in. It's learning how to get your feel for it, for where you got your transducer facing, where you're casting, your distance of casting. I mean, it's still a learning curve in and of itself. You know, what you save on not having to buy so much tackle, you're going to spend on transducers and sniper poles and dashboard mounts for your graphs and all that. I mean, it's there's still the investment. There's the investment of time. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's just for me personally, I just soon go play golf is to catch fish on live scope. You know what I mean? I just
Yeah.
to me it is a monotonous. Even catching fish, I just there's a sense of accomplishment that does not come with scoping for me.
Is it that we're just old?
I mean, I was feeling that way, but I like as I accept it more and more, like I don't know. Our state, just speaking for us locally here in Texas, is kind of fickle, and I didn't want to show up and have like the most powerful tool and an expensive kayak and all that, and because in the past, like doing really good, and this isn't the case in every state and everywhere, but it really did detour our participation, dominating and doing really well on the scene here. And I didn't want to show up with the most powerful tool, and because that's a deterrent to people who are getting into the sport. And that's a big reason why, like, I fished without live scope. And honestly, for the past 2 years, I haven't even fished with a motor. And it's to show people that you can still do it. I got into kayak fishing because I just yeah, I just kind of fell in love with the simplicity of it. And nowadays, it's anything but simple, especially nationally when you compete. But for me, like, yeah, I mean, you just got to embrace it going forward. Not saying you have to use it all the time, but man, like I see it, like the people that take the time to figure it out and know how to utilize it, they're almost unbeatable and consistent. And man, it's just a matter of getting good with it. It really is.
Being consistent, man, that's like such a big part of the sport, right? And I feel like you're right, man. If you start thinking about it, even if it just helps you for one kicker fish, man, how many times have you been that? At least for me, it's like I'm always on the cusp. All I need is that kicker fish, and that'll put me right where I want to be. And that's could be the quick kicker fish right there. Well, guys, I've kept you on here for about an hour or so. I want to give you a chance to thank your sponsors, your family, or whoever you want to thank. Matt, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, Dobbins rods. I got the hoodie on. As far as I'm concerned, best rods in the game. Got a rod for every action. Minnow shaking to throwing a big swim bait. So I mean, huge shout out to them. Mariner Cells, Texas Swim Baits, Dakota Lithium, Excite Baits. Kind of it. All companies I definitely believe in, make great products, and couldn't keep fishing without their support.
Awesome, man. Jordan?
Yeah, I'm kind of getting into the Dobbins rods program as well. It's funny you wore the hoodie, Matt. I was gonna ask you how all that was going. But I've got Miller Tech Lithium. It's I don't even bother going fishing anymore hardly without a motor. So that kind of keeps me going, and anything that I don't have to fiddle with and can't seem to break, which is wonderful for me. So I've having an app that keeps me from breaking things or running out of battery or anything else has been really helpful for me. Owner hooks, Hobie eyewear, um, um, McKee Outdoors. It's a local tackle shop by my house that I've been hanging out at since I was 16, and Matt McKee's done an amazing job with his tackle shop, and more and more people are finding out about that, and he's working on an online store, so be able to mail stuff out to you instead of I've picked up stuff from there and driven it to tournaments for people, and make things a lot easier with Matt doing it instead of having a third party for me taking it to him. So shout out to McKee, and I think that's it.
Well, guys, thanks for coming on, man. This has like really changed my perspective a lot, man. And I'm not just saying that because you guys are my friends, but it's just like I didn't want to believe that live scope was so powerful, but it is, and it's here to stay. So it's going to be interesting to see where the future takes us. Thanks again for coming on. Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll end it here.